The second question is, what's the one conversation? What's the one conversation, if you had it and it worked out well, you would be more effective at work, you would get better, faster results and or greater cooperation from the person you most need to get it from, but you're not getting it from currently? What is that one conversation that could be a game changer at work? And so I want to ask you to write down, this is for your eyes only, and you know what that conversation is. Now, for some of you, you might be like, well, I'm not sure. Okay. Let me trigger some thoughts. First, for those who know what the conversation, you're thinking, I'm not going to have that conversation. Consider the price you pay for not having it. So every month that you're paying your bills, you're paying an emotional bill, an energetic bill, an effectiveness bill by not having the conversation that could be a game changer. And maybe that will be enough of a why to be willing to have it, or at least consider it. So here's some conversations for you to think about if you're still like, I'm not sure. Is there somebody in the organization that there's a chasm between you and that person? There's been some sort of falling out, some sort of conflict that seems irreconcilable. Might that conversation be about building a bridge? Maybe it's about seeking to understand. Maybe it's that person where you're kind of like, what's the deal with Sally? You know, despite your best efforts to assume positive intention, you can't think of any intention like where they're coming from. So maybe it's having a kind and open and courageous conversation about, help me understand where you're coming from or why this is happening the way it is. So maybe it's a seek to understand, that person that just makes you scratch your head. And here's one that takes the most courage, I believe. And it's a conversation about making amends. Now, one of the other things about human nature, and I'm sure you can relate to this being a fellow human, is it's easy for us when we're overwhelmed or we're frustrated to treat people in ways that we justify. But if we're honest with ourselves later in the quietness of our home, we say, that's no way to treat another person. So maybe we chewed somebody out in public. Maybe we're overly harsh or cutting in our remark. And we're like, they deserved it. They screwed up. But in the quietness of our home, if we ask ourselves, would I like somebody to treat me that way? Or my loved one that way? The answer is a clear no. And so whether as a parent or as a leader, that we show our character and we forge strong bonds, I think especially when we're honorable enough and courageous enough to apologize and make amends. And so maybe that's the conversation that's a game changer for you. Anybody recognize these guys? So the guy on the right is Laird Hamilton, surf legend. Any surfers out here? Fellow surfers? All right, great. I know there's not a big surfing culture in Idaho. I'm from Maine. There's actually a fairly big winter surfing culture, which is insane, but it's that's when the waves are, so you make the best of it. The lady on the right is his wife, Gabrielle Reese, a former Olympic volleyball player. And I was listening to this really fascinating interview by Tim Ferriss, 4-Hour Workweek guy, with Laird and Gabby. And he asked them this question. Here's a great question to ask yourself. He said, what would you tell a 25-year-old version of you? What advice would you give? And they're in their mid to late 40s. And I love this. Gabby said this, go first. Go first. And she didn't mean like cut in line in the cafeteria. What she meant was, if there needs to be bridge building, fence mending, lead by example and go first. And one of the things that I've found over the years, even when I can't come up with positive intent, even when I try as hard as I can and I just don't like that person, I can't get to that place of really compassion and liking, my last ditch effort is to ask the question, what's for the highest good? What behavior on my part is for the highest good? And so maybe if that person that's that one conversation is somebody that you just can't get there in terms of liking, to ask what's for the highest good, not just for St. Luke's, but you might be, speak of leading by example, you might be the person in their life that models having a courageous conversation that is compassionate and respectful. They may never have seen that before. And the ripple effect that can have. So maybe sometimes that's all that gets me willing to be more kindly and compassionate when I have the conversation. So now that you've identified the one conversation, next steps, discuss with your mentor, coach, or wise friend the upside and the downside, because some conversations you might say, it's just not worth the potential downside, and that's your choice, that's your right. Ask them to help you understand, like, what's your part in it? Because when we're filled with anger or frustration, we don't see our part in it. And then ask them how to bring it up if you choose. And that's where I know you've got people in St. Luke's system who are into crucial conversations. So borrowing from their expertise. And also at your resource page that I put together, there are articles and a keynote that I did called Let's Talk for a Change that you can draw on that'll help you.